Welcome to u-nite, Unity Temple's weekly interspiritual service. I'm Reverend Nhien, the lead minister for this service. Interspirituality, what that means to us here is that while unity is both historically and culturally grounded in the teachings of Jesus, teachings such as grace, unconditional love, forgiveness, rather than the teachings about Jesus, we actively embrace here practices and principles from the world's religious and spiritual traditions, understanding that all of these have something that we can learn from. And so interspirituality also means for us, I'm reminded of a line from A Course in Miracles that says essentially this: a common theology or common belief system is impossible, but a common experience is not only possible, but necessary. And so we hope for you here that we gather together to have a shared experience of unity, of peace, of love, and of oneness, irrespective of what you personally believe. And so that's our perspective. We are in the midst of this, probably my favorite, all-time favorite book series. And this is based on Michael Singer's best-selling book, The Untethered Soul. In the first week of our lesson, I explored the concept of awakening consciousness. And during that week, what I talked about is this idea that, for the most part, I tend to think, my thoughts are me, or even that my feelings are me. And so my invitation in our first week was to start to be aware that if you can be aware of your thoughts, if we're quiet enough and we notice, if you can be aware of your feelings, if you can be aware of your bodily sensations, maybe you are not that. Maybe you are that awareness that can witness, that can observe that. And perhaps this is the beginning of awakening consciousness. And then in the second week, our multi-talented Maca Greenleaf Maple shared about experiencing energy. So that was part 2 of the book. So experiencing energy, we're talking, wow, what if there's this infinite, boundless force of life, constantly available, not only outside us, but within us. In fact, the very fabric of our being. And what if, classic example that he tells in the story is, what if you actually have access to that at all times, but what happens is, depending on our decisions, we close or we open. And, arguably, some of us say, well, no, if I have lower energy, I'm just tired. I'm tired by the week, I'm tired, it's Friday, etc. But his classic example is, hey, you might be depressed for 2 weeks after a breakup, right? And then your ex calls, and you want to get back together. Your ex calls, and suddenly you have all this energy. You get up, you put some of us put our makeup on, but this idea that, the energy was always there. So you made a decision in consciousness in a moment to open to it. So the question of existence, what am I? And then what do I have access to? Second week. And in the third week, I talked about freeing yourself. And so most of us think that on a daily basis, we make decisions out of free will. I get up and I decide, do I go to church or not? I'm the minister. Do I go to church or not today? But I generally think I'm deciding what I eat, what I wear, and what I don't often realize. But if I sink into it, my decisions seem to follow a pattern. Yeah, right? And this pattern we talked about fits like an Enneagram structure of personality that can predict the likelihood that I'm going to pick a certain thing over another. And so in that, I can recognize that I'm not as free as I thought I was. And then last week, week 4, we talked about going beyond. That's the title of part 4 in Michael Singer's book. And going beyond is this idea, and the example I gave is that our personality construct is like a house. And so what happens is, before we leave every day, we have the stories, the tapes of like who we are and how we're going to be in the world, our mottos for living. And so most of the time, we live from these limiting beliefs about things. And when any of our self-constructs get challenged, what happens? We double down, right? Oh, I'm identified as an unselfish person. Did you just deign to say that me taking this trip instead of spending the money and going to see my mom is a selfish, so I'm going to try to build walls and defend. But the idea is that if the truth of who we are is this vast, free energy, every time we try to defend a construct about who we are, we're actually limiting the potentiality of our lives. And so what happens is instead, if we can focus on, I got whacked, someone just said something that affects my sense of self, who I think I am in the world. Instead of defending that, I let myself feel those feelings, let them move through me, and then I don't have to live defending that construct within me. I'm going beyond my personal self into a more universal self, what we here in Unity call our divine self. And here we believe that God or Spirit is both immanent and transcendent, bigger than us, but also the very essence of our own being. So all that set up for today. And finally, we get to live life. Today's part 5 is entitled Living Life. And we're actually going to take 2 weeks to do this because, there's a lot to be said about living life. And today in particular, we'll focus on something that maybe the bulk of us don't always ponder on a daily basis, which is death. And so we'll focus on how contemplating death helps us to choose the joy of life. So about 12 years ago in my home church of Unity in Marin out in California, where I'm originally from, we did this fundraiser, and so they did keychains, affirmations on keychains, and license plate holders. Traditionally, I wasn't the kind of person that personalized my stuff, or had little sayings or logos, definitely not a bumper sticker type of person. But in order to support the church, I went over to where they were selling the license plate holders and was kind of canvassing which one might fit me. And there were some really positive statements about many paths to God, all these things that were teaching kind of things and more traditionally fitting with who I am. But then I saw this one license plate holder that said, "Enlighten up." And I thought, that's exactly what I need. Because I have been a serious person all my life. And then when I got to the spiritual journey, it was all work. Because I'm going to deserve this good, and I'm going to deserve this happiness. And I was serious about it. I would do all the readings in my classes and do all the work. But really, in the end, I was coming to realize this core teaching in Unity, that happiness is our birthright. That we are meant to be joyful, that we are meant to sort of not take life or ourselves so seriously because we don't have to work to deserve this. That was beginning to kind of open to this realization. Of course, being an ever diligent student, when I kind of opened to this new way of living, I went online and did research on it. And so I started looking at what are the keys to happiness, right? And so if you go online or if you go to any bookstore, there are just rows of books on how to be happy, right? And you've got 5 keys and 10 secrets to happiness and all these different paths. And many of us who have come to the spiritual journey might be like, I know that happiness isn't found in getting the right car. You know, it's not found in the material ways. A lot of folks in this room whom I've talked to would probably say that as a general matter. That, you know, well, what we do know is it's not in the material things. And even I say, you know, it's not about making a certain income. You know, having left my prestigious and lucrative law career, I thought, oh, okay, I'm not attached to those things as being part of my path to happiness. But then, I mean, when I really take a hard look at myself, and I look at the fact that if I walk into my bathroom and the towels don't match, I'm not very happy. Like, you know, I mean, we can talk about not being attached to the world of form or material things, but on an everyday basis, oh, the temperature isn't okay in this room. I can't be happy. The lighting, the seats are uncomfortable. I can't be happy in this moment because something in the world of form, the material world, is keeping me from being happy. So many of us, you know, we can say we're not attached to the world of form, but if I look at my actual prescription for happiness, it does mean Ethan Allen towels. But you know, matching towels at minimum. You know, it does mean that I walk into my place and it's beautiful and it's orderly. There are some things that I realize my happiness shifts up and down based on this. And I can say, oh, well, that's superficial, but we're talking a path to happiness. And if something that little is going to rock me, like maybe I have some work to do around that. Maybe I have to look at whether I am attached to form. And then I even have to look at, wait a minute, many of us have come to a broader understanding. You know, we'll say, no, the key to happiness is a life of service. A life of giving. The key to happiness is having love in your life. And so many of us in the spiritual communities will say, like, that's better. You know, that's better than saying you have a certain job or a certain car or a certain house. But really, so what happens then is the love of my life decides I'm not the love of his life, right? Or someone I hold dear passes away. There's loss. Can I be happy now? These things that I value, oh, service is of great value. So I'm going to judge myself or others on the basis of whether they're helpful or not, whether they're selfish or giving, whether they volunteer enough. You know, and so even in what we call traditionally moral or spiritual rubrics for happiness, we find that our happiness can still go up and down when we base it on these things, when we base it on anything. And so in the midst of all this, scanning and looking and endeavoring to find happiness, I come across this teaching that has been repeated now, you know, in Michael Singer's book, which is this idea. I'm not going to give it away right now, but we'll talk about it. We'll talk about these ideas today. I'm going to talk in 3 parts. First part is, what is the key to happiness? You know, second part is, no, really, what is the key to happiness? And then the third part is, how does contemplating death support us in this? And so, first, well, no, the key to happiness is making your happiness dependent on other people's behavior, right? Is that true? Oh, okay. You disagree with me. But you know what? I may disagree in principle, but if I think about it, if I have people irritated if I do a book series, and I have people irritated if I don't do a book series. They're displeased, they're unhappy. If I teach the Enneagram too much, if I teach it too little, right? Like what I do dictates. Like, are you going to be okay on your spiritual path if I don't obey, you know, if I don't comply? So we think about it. And the key to happiness is not conditioning your behavior on other people, not conditioning your happiness on other people's behavior. Because here's the thing, it's bad enough when we condition our happiness on our own behavior. Think about that. Like if I don't show up, if I misstep, if I miss a beat in a song, if I, put my sermon out of order, like I'm not going to be okay, right? So we look at that. And if instead, if we realize to what extent we're doing it, then Michael Singer says, we reach a choice point where the ways in which we condition happiness on either the behavior of others, our own behavior, or the natural world cooperating in a certain way, having certain weather, being a certain way for us, having certain conditions, then basically we're screwed, because the world will not cooperate. As we said, we won't even cooperate with ourselves. The ceiling's falling. This is the bizarrest. So, if we condition our happiness on the condition of our outer world, let's see how this talk goes. So Michael Singer says, there's only one real way to happiness, which is we must choose it. And when I read this, and I think most of the people whom I hang out with are like, I want to be happy, they say. We say, I want to be happy. But the idea is that if we say it like we mean it, if we mean it like a vow, then what happens is, the next thing that happens that is out of order, that is out of place, that is not in my agenda, what are we going to do about it? We say, I choose happiness and I want happiness, but then we start to modify it, right? Well, but my health diagnosis wasn't what I wanted it to be at the doctor's. Well, I went to the dentist and they have a potential project in my mouth that's going to be $6,000 is what they said. This is a true story. And I was like, and you feel the fear come up, and you can feel when things come up that don't comply with these hidden conditions for happiness, your system starts to drop that happiness, right? And so it starts to, instead of just being okay and choosing happiness, irrespective of the circumstance, what does it try to do? Change the circumstance. And that's how most of the world is taught to operate. And that's actually how most of us are taught to be resourceful in the world. I was taught that one of my strengths was my ability to see what was wrong with something and go and fix it. But in that, what I lost was any sense of peace of mind in my life. Spending that first 30 plus years of my life not peaceful at all, not happy at all. But I was busy building a life that I would hope to be happy from eventually, someday, right? I was so busy changing the conditions of myself and of my life in order to be happy and to realize that I can just choose it. But it's not a just, right? Because if we're in the face of this, what happens? Well, let's go over the Enneagram typology, because it can be helpful to see what are the different conditions that the Enneagram types put on happiness as a type 1 on the Enneagram. So this type, it conditions happiness on things, used to condition happiness on things being orderly of all things, and things being right and proper, done the way that I think they should be done. That I should do things the way I think they should be done. And if I didn't, I would beat myself up. So there would be immense suffering and no happiness at all. So the setup is to condition happiness on things being right based on some idealized standard that's out there. If you're a type 2 on the Enneagram, you're more likely to base your happiness on the people you love being okay, right? Are they okay? If we're really honest about it, twos, it's not just that they're okay, but that they're okay and they know that you had a role in it, you know? Right? They're okay, and you have a sense of, I was pivotal in this okayness because I'm the one who helped. So getting accolades or approval, validation that you matter, that you're important, that you were helpful. So not only are the people in your life happy because of you, but they know it. And when this is not true in one little area, the type 2 tends to not be able to rest in a sense of happiness. For the type 3, the performer, it's performance, achievement, success. And we need to be clear here. As people progress on the spiritual path, the first thing a 3 does is make success enlightenment, right? The goal changes, but the mode of operation is still the same. I will be happy once I accomplish enlightenment. And faster than other people usually for the 3. So the most competitive type on the Enneagram, because my construct, my default, my often unconscious, sometimes conscious conditions on happiness is that, right? And so the type 4 is a little bit trickier, because the type 4, has this sort of backward way in which happiness is conditioned upon my suffering. I'm attached to my suffering because somehow indirectly, like if I suffer enough, maybe someone will save me, or if I suffer enough, then I will feel special, and if I feel special, then I will be happy. And so there's a mixed up way in which, true of all types, true of all constructs, you never get there. It's pretty clear in that methodology, right? But it's so ingrained in the particular personality types of these structures that, it really feels like this is true. It really feels like my joy and my happiness and my inner peace is dependent upon my suffering. And so the need to recognize it and let it dislodge a bit. Let it go loose. Say, actually, I can choose joy. If you're a type 5 on the Enneagram, then chances are, in many different ways, you condition happiness on certainty, on knowing enough, on understanding, and the solidity and sense of security that gives you. And so there's a sense that, in a way, happiness can be almost like equated with certainty and security, a level of comfort. I'm not going to be happy until I know all that I need to know about that subject, so I can render myself safer in this world, more protected, so I can maintain my life as it is. For the type 6 on the Enneagram, the quest, the desire is to condition happiness on having forecast enough into the future in order to safeguard against any threats to either your finances, your loved ones, or your own physical self. That I can't be happy until I know that's been taken care of. And most people aren't as worried as I am as a 6, so I'm going to think about it and take care of it. But when I can finally project enough of the threats that lay before me, then I can rest and be happy. And on the topic of 6s, there's a story about, so why was the type 6 horse so happy? Because he lived in a stable environment. That's what I thought that's my only joke. That's my only joke for today. So, because he lived in a stable environment, right? So 6s forecast in order to feel that sense of stability in the present moment. But what happens to the present moment? It's busy forecasting in the future. Happiness isn't here. And then the 7, this type 7 conditions happiness on the maintenance of unlimited, ideally, but on the maintenance of options. And so there's something about not being okay until you actually keep things open. Like if you feel confined at all, like needing to choose and constrict, that's not okay for a 7. It's really hard, except when you start your spiritual journey, that starts to budge a little. But just in the regular health of a 7. Why? Because there isn't a belief that happiness is ever really here. But there's a delusion that if you kind of keep searching for it, and you got to keep options open, because there's a part of you that doesn't believe it's anywhere, so you got to keep all the options open, because it's not there, if it's not at that party, I'm going to go to the next one. If it's not in that book, I'm going to read the next one really quickly, right? Keeping options open in order to preserve the capacity, potential, or the illusion that happiness is to be found eventually. And so for the type 8 on the Enneagram, the 8 will condition its happiness on being in control and having justice done. And so if there has been a wrong, especially to anyone that is represented as an underdog, to a child, to animals, if there has been an injustice, it is so challenging for the type 8 to find rest, peace, and fulfillment until that has been vindicated. And so the vengeance of the type 8 comes forth. And I'm sure we could see a little bit of ourselves in many of these. But looking at what's core, we're looking at there's just so hard to find happiness when this requirement is not being met. For the type 9, the requirement is harmony. And so it could be harmony with my environment if I'm a self-pres 9, but usually it's a harmony with all things, my environment, the people around me. And that the people around me need to be harmonious with one another. I can't be happy. Why? Because there is a disturbance in the force, right? For the 9, there's a disturbance in the force. I can't be happy because I can feel into all of that, and I'm so sensitive to that. And deeper rooted in that need for the 9 is that when there's conflict, the 9 feels separate. But deep down, the 9 already feels separate. So that's why conflict can be so unbearable for the 9. Right? So there's this deep sense of being separate, and conflict just blows it all out, and I'm all alone now. There's no oneness and unity in that. So these are just a few examples of the ways in which the spectrum of ways in which we can condition our happiness on what ultimately we probably sometimes say we don't, which is this ends up being about the behavior of others, the behavior of ourselves, and the conditions of our natural environment. They all feed into these in some way, and I can't be happy. And in the end, Michael Singer impresses this upon us. In the end, all we have, and yet when we do it, it's the most powerful spiritual practice, is to say yes to happiness, is to make a vow of commitment in a way. We talk about unconditional love. Here, he talks about the path of unconditional happiness. And so the invitation is to say, here, I'm being triggered by the fact that this person isn't responding to me, responding to my texts in the way that I would like, right? Instead of trying to change that person's behavior, what do I do now? I let that distress move in my body. I sit with it. I allow this moment's experience of life to be welcomed unconditionally. Because in a way, the path of unconditional happiness is no different from the path of unconditionally living. It's saying yes to this moment. It's not saying not until, hold off moment, hold off life, wait till I get the right lamp for my house. Wait till I get the right job. Hold on, right? It's saying yes to this moment, saying I'm willing to tap into that universal energy. I'm willing to be that committed. And Michael Singer's teaching is that when we stay committed to this degree, what happens is our personal preferences starts to dissolve. And then we come to realize, oh, we really didn't need that. How many things, if you've been on a path of personal growth or spiritual development for a while now, how many things did you used to need people to do or the world to be like for you to be happy that you don't need now? You know? When I think about that, that helps me to free myself up into the next moment of saying, I used to think that really was like the requirement of life. It used to be that I really did need my dad to say, I love you. Like that used to be a requirement, and it isn't anymore. My joy does not change. If in a phone call today with my dad, I don't hear that. And many of you know that in my relationship with my father, I've never heard that. But I know now that he loves me. And I know it because things have freed up, because I've let the energy move. Because I've taken out the requirements that love be expressed in the way that I think it should be expressed. That conditioned way of living and embracing like the moment. And so how many things have I changed in? And if I know that, then maybe the possibility that I could let it all go, that there is nothing that can happen to me, through me, toward me, for me in this world that could cause me to choose anything short of happiness. But I want to make sure that we don't do a spiritual bypass in this, because it happens too often, I think, in the positivity of unity. Because here we go, you know, I just had something happen to me and I'm upset. And I'm like, oh, I'm upset. And then I say, oh, I got to choose happiness, you know. And so I strain and I'm like willpowering it into this happiness when this upset is sort of like still there. So this is why, this is the fifth part of the book. All the other processes of clearing your consciousness matters. The ways in which we, through these weeks, which you can go back to, they're all on YouTube, the ways through these weeks, we recognize that when anything triggers us, we let it move, and it starts to purify consciousness. So when something does happen, we don't immediately jump to choose happiness, choose forgiveness, choose like, instead we let the energy of the feeling be the moment of experience. Like, wow, can I actually, at a base level, be happy even though like I have feelings of rejection and sadness being like coursing through my body right now? Yes. That's the answer. That there's this unconditional way of living in which suddenly now there's a yes to every moment of life. And then the more yeses like that, what happens? That stuff clears. And then you reach a point where same text, same whatever, no reaction from me. It didn't bug me at all. I didn't even notice. You know, when I was new here and a brand new minister, fresh, I was an attorney. Ministry was a completely new type of job. I didn't know what I was doing. I was still a student full-time, and I come here, and I got a piece of criticism when I did the 10:30 service, because my senior minister does talks between like 15 and 20 minutes, and mine was 22 minutes. And I was new, so I guess looking back also, I guess people go through a little bit of a, whatever, when they're new. And it was just me being new that I think people were being critical and vetting me, et cetera. But it crushed me. I cried and cried and cried. I cried because I was like, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm not doing this right. And I feel like, wow, you have come a long way. I'm like, oh, sorry, my talk was 40 minutes now. Oh, it's like to own who you are, sort of unapologetically, and to kind of stand in that truth. Like I was so new and in some ways felt so small then, that trigger, because that trigger also said, oh, you're not okay. You're not good enough. And all these stories and tapes, but instead now, that hurt. That hurt, and let the hurt move. And then suddenly, months or maybe years later, you just find the fruits of that practice of letting life move through you and not repressing it, not saying no. Suddenly, you're clear. Like, oh, that's okay. That's okay now. It really is. And then we get to realize that the people that we put on pedestals, not just Jesus as a way shower, but Viktor Frankl, the man who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he's in a Jewish concentration camp for years, sees everyone he loves dies, and comes out and is like, we have the freedom to choose our attitude in any situation. He's saying this. And it's like, when I look at people like that, sometimes we can read books and be like, wow, they're such amazing people. I'm going, no, this is possible for us. It could be that bad. But I have a ways to go if I'm still worried about the color of my curtains, right? I belittle it, but there's something about us that wants to control our environment. So it's not that simple. It's not just, oh, it's the colors of my curtain. It's that I need to control my environment. And if I can't control it, I don't feel okay, right? God, put yourself in his shoes. Can you believe that? Can you actually believe that your true freedom, your happiness is in the choice of your attitude? If you've been in a Jewish concentration camp. So I can take stories like his, and try not to just put them over there as amazing people, but bring it home and understand that this is the capacity of every human being to live that free. And so the work, in a way, is the work merely of saying yes and letting go of the ways in which we hold ourselves against each moment. Is this moment okay with you? That's all you have to say yes to. And if you're saying no, chances are there's a personality construct you're defending here that you're trying to uphold. There's a life circumstance that you're conditioning your happiness on. And any of us who have journeyed that path probably has the experience that it doesn't work. Most of us don't relinquish the, well, if everything's going to comply, then I'll be okay. Like, I don't relinquish that until I kind of hit a bottom and go, oh, this really doesn't work. Nobody will cooperate with me. This doesn't work, Like, we realize after our futile striving to change our outer conditions, to finally be okay, we give up. And maybe in that giving up, we let go. It's not resignation, but actually a kind of peace that says, I'm going to try another way. What if I could be happy for the rest of my life? I would start to wake up. Now the quote. Yes. Affirm that all you want, I'll read that. Affirm that all you want is not for things to change. That all you want is to be at peace and to appreciate life. You don't want your happiness to be conditional upon the behavior of other people. It's bad enough that your happiness is conditional upon your own behavior. When you start making it conditional upon other people's behavior, you're in serious trouble. If you decide that you're going to be happy from now on for the rest of your life, you will not only be happy, you will become enlightened. Unconditional happiness is the highest technique there is. You don't have to learn Sanskrit or read any scriptures. You don't have to renounce the world. You just have to really mean it when you say that you choose to be happy. And you have to mean it regardless of what happens. This is truly a spiritual path, and it is as direct and sure a path to awakening as could possibly exist, he says. And so, you could make that decision today. You could make it right now. I've made it before, and I find I change my mind in moments. But there's a trend of saying yes to that. And I like to think of it as a vow that honors like this highest way of being in the world. And that in moments, this week, I realized there are some things that happened this week for me relationally with friendships and trust and a sense of betrayal that I remember thinking how much I wanted this other person to change. And then I remembered this. And I'm like, you know what, Nhien, you can be free of that even that. Let it go. Like really let it go. And so I have this sincere sense of devotion now, not done perfectly, but a sense of devotion to the vow that I will live and lead a life of like unconditional happiness. That's really to live unconditionally. And what helps me to remember that, I'll keep this final section short. It really doesn't need to be long. What helps me remember that is, last week I went to 2 celebration of life services, encountering death. About a year ago, I actually officiated a celebration of life service for a baby. That was hard, But in those moments, like when you're with death, like you really get it, or you can. You face your own death, you face the sort of the finite aspect of this life, and you really are like, does that really matter, Nhien? Because the truth of it is, like, I don't want to look at it in a morbid way. All of you could die any moment, there's one way of looking at that. All of you could leave here, and none of us know when our last breath is. We could look at that in this really sad and fearful and morbid way. Or we can use that to say, how then shall I live? There's a book titled that, Knowing That I Shall Die, How Then Shall I Live? And if we're checked out, if I'm too busy constructing the requirements for being happy that I never let myself be happy, then I've already died. I'm not alive. I'm not living. If I'm compulsively thinking about strategies, maybe I'm not doing, I'm just compulsively thinking about a topic that if I think about it, if I figure it out, I will be happy then. I'm not living any of those moments of my life. And so my invitation to each of us, to myself each and every day, is to confront death, to really say, you know what? I don't know. There's this baby who died, and then there's this 90-year-old man who passed away. In between that, people pass away when they're brushing their teeth. The things that you are doing in every moment, when I'm brushing my teeth, asleep, driving, all these things that you do every day. And so are you going to do them? Are you going to be with them, or are you going to resist it? Are you going to numb out, check out through addiction, eating, whatever it is, or will you be fully present to it?